Awesome. Okay, so the agenda for today's session. Yeah, we're going to talk about various methodologies and frameworks for how you go about assessing the level of risk associated with your projects, with your ideas. Specifically, we're going to be focusing on the business model canvas by Alexander Osterwalder. And we're going to dive into the three parts of it: the desirability section, feasibility section, and viability sections of the canvas. A few expectations before we really get into things. These are all high-level methodologies and frameworks. I apologize I didn't edit this slide. You do not have bi-weekly meetings with me. Some of you do because you're my students, but for those who are new faces here, if you would like to meet with me after today's session, I can help apply what we're talking about today to your specific projects. But the purpose of the sessions we're delivering in the Boost program or other programs we run at IBZ is really for you to become familiar with all the things that you're going to have to consider throughout your entrepreneurial journey. It's really about awareness here. And before I get into this type of content, I like to ground ourselves in a definition for what a startup is. And my favorite definition is by Eric Ries, author of The Lean Startup. And he states that a startup is a human institution designed to create new products and services under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And I underline extreme uncertainty because it's the uncertainty and the associated risk that separates an entrepreneur from a business person. As you can imagine, entrepreneurs are solving problems in novel ways, and as a result, they're charting new paths never embarked upon before. And there's a high degree of risk associated with that. So how do we, as entrepreneurs, begin to assess and mitigate that risk? Well, a great way to at least visualize this is using a tool called the Jahari Window. And in the Jahari Window, information is broken down into 4 categories: known knowns, known unknowns, unknown knowns, and unknown unknowns. It's a big mouthful. I know, probably doesn't make a lot of sense. But the way that this is structured is the first word indicates whether you have a particular data point, and the second word indicates whether you have control over it or not. And as such, risk increases from the first to 4th category. You can think of these alternatively as truths, hypotheses, and unknowns. So when you start your entrepreneurial journeys, your view of the world looks something like this. You only see really a small sliver of the world, and that sliver is filled with what you know to be true. So it's usually associated with your idea, right? You've done some research into if this is feasible or not to build. And you have a lot of hypotheses about your market and the problem that you're solving. But behind you is this massive blind spot, things you haven't even begun to think about, things associated with your industry, things about your customers' lives, their pain points, cares, constraints, goals. All of these things you don't even know what questions to ask yet. And it's this blind spot that's connected to the high degree of risk associated with the majority of startup failures. So how we go about navigating this blind spot and finding truth in it is by utilizing one of the most proven methods for finding truth in the unknown, the scientific method. Now, I assume a lot of you on the call, and again, I know a couple of you because you're in my class, but I assume you guys are scientists and engineers, probably from FIAS. Maybe you're not. So if you are from FIAS, you're familiar with this process, right? The scientific method was designed to remove our own inherent biases from a situation, to observe the world skeptically, formulate hypotheses based on inductive reasoning, develop tests for those hypotheses, analyze the data, and either choose to accept or reject those hypotheses. But you might be thinking, if this is your first time kind of going about entrepreneurship and applying a scientific approach to it, you might be thinking, how do we develop tests for entrepreneurship? This isn't like developing a test in a lab or in the field. And I like to say that entrepreneurship is a human endeavor. It's efforts made by human beings, surrounded by human beings. So as a result, your tests will come in the form of engaging with other people. And by going out and talking to your customers, by going out and talking to other people in your respective industry, you will start to gain insights, information, the blind spot we were just talking about. You'll start to uncover new information and use that information to formulate new hypotheses that when you test will become new truths you can hold on to as a business. And in this way, you'll begin to start reducing risk. You'll gain what are called validated learnings, actionable information you can move forward with a higher probability of success in your respective space. Now, the transference of information from one area of your Jahari window to another is known as a market insight. The discovery of relevant, actionable, and previously unrealized information about a target market as the result of deep subjective data analysis. This is what you're looking for. This is what we care about at IBZ. This is what you should be caring about going through this process. Uncovering new information and validating that information. So I personally, if to give you a little bit of a background on myself, I started a company at Ryerson University, and I've told a few of you this story, but we were in the urban infrastructure space. And what we really wanted to do was bring this technology called porous asphalt. It's basically, imagine a road with big pores in it that's going to allow water to filter through into the sediment below. It has a lot of advantages for an urban center. It helps the ground from desertifying, right? So when the ground desertifies, all the greenery and trees die, and that's what happens in Toronto. Our trees don't last very long because the ground is basically solid. It helps filter out toxic chemicals and contaminants from entering our water bodies. We can just it filters through the soil, gets caught in the soil, so our water would be cleaner. And it helps with flood mitigation. So we had a massive flood in Toronto, probably like a decade ago, that costed us like close to like $1 billion in damages. Absolutely crazy. And that stuff wouldn't happen as as severely if we had porous asphalt in places like Toronto. And so I started looking into this. And what I found was you can't have porous asphalt in cities like Toronto because we experience sub-zero temperatures. Any water in the pores of the asphalt would expand in the winter and cause the asphalt to crack. So then my goal became, so how can I keep the asphalt from cracking? And I started looking into different methods and mechanisms for doing that. And I went through the process that many of you are embarking upon right now of trying to figure out, is this an actual problem in the industry? Do they care about bringing porous asphalt to cities like Toronto? And along this journey of trying to figure this out, my solution changed quite a bit, pivoting. And it ended up in my kind of last little phase of my company. We ended up on just focusing on the implementation of heating systems in bridges. So I'll talk to you a little bit more about that throughout today's presentation. But that's a little bit more about me and my company, Liminal Power. So my journey and your journey will follow something called the Gartner hype cycle. You have this moment where you come up with your idea. It's called this innovation trigger, whether that's you're talking in a group with your friends and you come up with something together, singing in the shower, an idea pops in your head, or you're just alone kind of reading a book or something. And you start to do secondary market research on this. And the more research you find, the more it kind of corroborates your initial idea, and you enter this peak of inflated expectations. This thought that I'm going to be a billionaire, party on my yacht next summer. I've been there. Trust me, we all reach that high. But the minute you start to action on your idea, the minute you start to put it out into the world and start engaging with people, you start to find out that you're wrong, left, right, and center, and you enter what's called the trough of disillusionment. This is where the majority of project ideas die. This is where the majority of startups die. But it's the ones who continue to apply what they are learning to their project that enter what's called the slope of enlightenment, where you actually start to build a business around this and grow it sustainably. So our job at IBZ and the programs that we run is to help shorten this period of time in the trough of disillusionment and get you into the slope of enlightenment much, much faster, utilizing less resources and you putting in less time. Now, I purposely leave a blind spot in my second Jahari window, even though we're in the slope of enlightenment, because there's always a need to apply this scientific approach. There's always a need to amass new information to help you make better decisions. Look at the COVID pandemic we're in right now. Look at changing political landscapes, new emerging competitors. There's always a need to be finding new information before making very risky decisions. Now, no matter what project you're working on, there's going to be 3 areas of risk. Number 1, market risk. Are there enough people or organizations out there with a severe problem that you can address with your theorized solution? Product risk. Is it even technologically feasible to build what you want to build? And execution risk. You amass the resources necessary to take your idea to market. The mechanisms by which we reduce these risk areas gives us the rationale for how we create, deliver, and capture value for our customers. How we represent this is known as a business model. Business model encapsulates everything about what we do in bringing value to our customers. And sometimes this can be done as a business plan. This is an internal working document, 25 to 100 pages long. Sometimes it's used to raise venture capital. But many of you might be in a position right now where you're facing what's called the blank canvas problem. Maybe that's why you're here today. A fear of starting because you have unlimited possibilities in front of you. Where do I even start to put my business model together? What does that even, what comprises a business model? And that kind of leads me into the second point here. The solution to this blank canvas problem are frameworks that break up the infinite into more constrained variables. So we want to use frameworks, and there's lots of business model frameworks out there. I've listed a bunch here. You're more than welcome to check them out. Use whatever one you believe is best for your respective projects. But the one we use at Lab to Market, the one I advise people using at IBZ, is the Business Model Canvas by Alexander Osterwalder. It was developed in 2005, and it's essentially a blueprint for creating your business model and strategy. It's comprised of 9 basic building blocks, which do a decent job at representing the core elements of your business model. It's not exactly perfect, but what it does very, very well is show the interrelationship between different parts of your business model. And that's key, to see how one part affects another. And so it's kind of like this crazy scientific equation. We got to make sure all the pieces fit and work together. Now, a couple other reasons why we choose the business model canvas. Since its inception in 2005, it's essentially become a common language. So you can speak about this with people in your industry and they'll understand what it is that you're talking about. And lastly, it's a single page. It's going to allow for quick iterations. And that's what we want. We don't want to be building out a business plan of 25 to 100 pages. We want something that we can iterate upon extremely quickly. So here's the process you're going to be going through on your own or through one of our programs. You're going to start with the business model canvas or some other framework. You're going to populate it with all of the hypotheses that you have about your project. And then you're going to systematically run tests against those hypotheses. And we'll be talking about these tests in our next boost session together. You'll analyze the data that you're amassing and then either choose to accept or reject the hypotheses. So again, if I look at my own experiences with liminal power, one of my biggest hypotheses was around my solution. I thought I was aware of the regulations that governed its design and how it should be implemented. I thought I had a really good understanding of what my customers wanted or their problems, what their problems were based on secondary market research. So I thought I had something that would work in the space. So I ran a test. I started talking to governments all across Ontario, regional governments, provincial governments, And what I found was there was all of these things in my blind spot, things I hadn't even considered, other regulations that I wasn't aware of, other cares and constraints that my customers had. So basically I learned that my current solution, my current value proposition was not going to fly. And I had to use that information to refine my hypothesis and run new experiments on it. So I ran more experiments with governments, my theorized customers, and ended up finding something that had a higher probability of succeeding in the space. It became a more permanent fixture in my business model. And you're going to do this for all of your hypotheses. Your journey will also look something like this. This is an over exaggeration or maybe an oversimplification, I guess. But essentially what is going to happen is when you start out down this road, you're going to get a few data points. And it's going to be hard to see patterns in that information. But as you amass more and more data, you'll start to see correlations in that information. And from those correlations, those patterns, you'll be able to derive market insights from them, those validated learnings we were talking about, to then, when you do make decisions to move forward with certain things, you have a higher probability of success. You have focus and clarity. And this is what we want. So in summary, everyone, risk is associated with the unknown, our blind spots. How we test our hypotheses are through engagements with the market or industry. And the business model canvas is our home base for these tests. So I'll pause here if there's any questions. So the first thing I want to talk about is hypothesis formation. And so I want to align ourselves on what a hypothesis even is. So a hypothesis is an assumption made on the basis of limited evidence as a starting point for further investigation. And that is key here, right? It's just a starting point. A lot of people at this stage get really scared putting hypotheses forward because you're not sure if it's right. And you don't need to be right. It's just a starting point. Put your best guess forward. And what makes a really good hypothesis is that it's testable. To be testable, it needs to be precise and discrete. What I mean by precise is it needs to be specific. So the more specific you can make your hypotheses, the easier it's going to be for you to develop tests around it and either validate or reject it a lot faster. And we'll get into this in a little bit more detail throughout today's presentation. The second point, discreteness. This is more of an operational thing, but a lot of people like to lump up their hypotheses into one massive hypothesis that encapsulates a bunch of different things. And it just makes it hard to validate and reject them. So you want to separate everything out into its constituent parts, their own individual hypotheses, and you want them to be as specific as possible. Another term that I want to align ourselves on right now is the term stakeholder. So stakeholders are any person, organization, social group, or society at large that has a stake in your business. They can affect and or be affected by your business. So these are, yes, your customers, but there are also other people in your ecosystem that are important in you being able to execute on your business model. We're going to talk about stakeholders quite a bit in today's session. So let's jump into the desirability section of the canvas. So the desirability section is comprised of 4 of the 9 building blocks: customer segments, value proposition, channels, and customer relationship. And together they essentially represent your market. So they represent who your customers are, what problems that they have, what is your offering, does it meet those problems, and how do you actually deliver that value proposition to your customers? What types of relationships do they want to have with you? Now, this is debatably the most important thing to figure out in your business model canvas because it's the #1 reason that startups fail. 42% of startups fail because they have no market need. They're building something or they're laboring under the assumption that what they're building is addressing a problem for a particular person or organization, but they've actually never engaged with those people, right? It's extremely risky what these teams and companies are doing. And we don't want to fall into that 42%. So we need to apply the scientific approach to figuring out the desirability section of our canvas. Now, the first two building blocks we're going to focus on are the ones that comprise product market fit, customer segments, and value proposition, our market and our offering. Now, when it comes to customer segments, they are the different groups of people or organizations you aim to reach and serve. So to figure out who your customer segments are, you should ask yourself, for whom are we creating value? My idea, what I think my idea is, what my solution is, who am I actually providing value to with it? And we want to start with customer segments because the cares, the problems that our customers have, what they're looking for in a solution, how they want to work or interact with us, their budgets, all of these things have profound implications on our entire business model, right? I like to say perspective is everything. The perspective of our customers is everything to our business model. We want to start here and we want to understand our customers to an extremely high degree. We're ultimately building out this business model for them. Now, I'm also using kind of the terms customer segment and market a lot. And you might start to think, are they interchangeable? Do they mean the same thing? Do they mean different things? So think of a market as everyone that you could provide value to, right? But as you can imagine, especially if you have a technology with a very broad range of applications, you can service so many different types of people, different size of businesses, different types of people, different family sizes, age brackets, job types, all of these different types of customer personas. A customer segment is a sliver of all of these potential customers of your value proposition, where you think that potentially there's a higher need there or something you just want to focus on, right? So that's what a customer segment is. It's a slice of this bigger pie. Now, when you're thinking through, how if a customer segment comes into your head and you're trying to think, is this the same as my other customer segment, or does this warrant its own segment on my business model canvas? You can ask yourself these questions. Do their needs justify distinct offerings? So do you actually have to change your offering to provide value to them? Are they reached through different distribution channels, right? Do you provide your product or service to them differently? Do they require different types of relationships with you? Are they willing to pay for different aspects of your offering? And do they have substantially different profitabilities? Now, I'm jumping around to different parts of the business model canvas, and I apologize for doing that because we haven't talked about it, but I want you to have these questions so that you can listen to this recording or look at the slides after today's presentation. And as you're thinking about your customer segments, ask yourself these questions to help you populate your customer segment building block. Now, here's a key message that I think, words of warning that I think really need to get across. It's not for a lack of ideas or leads that startups generally fail. It's because they have too many. Startups don't starve, they drown, right? And so when you're thinking about your customer segments, it's really important to be really focused, right? That's the whole exercise of segmenting your market, because if you go too broad, a lot of things can happen. So if we don't focus, you get overwhelmed with options, right? You can't move forward, and at the same time, you can't prove yourself wrong. You can't move backwards. You're like stuck in this purgatory state because you have all of these data points that aren't correlating. In that journey map we were talking about, you get stuck in that crazy cobweb, at the beginning of that journey map. You can't make sense of anything. You can't move forward. This is point 3. You get mixed data that you simply just can't make sense of. So before you serve everyone, you have to serve somebody. And that's why we go through this process of customer segmentation. Now, another thing is, we look at the big tech companies of the world like Amazon and Google, who serve everybody, and we think we should do the same thing. And that's just not true. Even Amazon and Google started with very specific customer segments. Amazon sold only books, right? Google sold little bits of code to PhD students. Again, before you serve everyone, you have to serve someone. Seeing a message here too. Oh, so a couple people are leaving. That's totally fine. Come and go as you please, guys. This will be recorded and will be shared with you after today's session. So if you're in a situation where your idea, your technology, your offering is applicable to multiple customer segments, to help you filter this down to one or two that are worth starting with, you should do an external or internal analysis. And what this could be is externally, you could ask yourself, which markets have the biggest pain points? Can you do some secondary market research to quantify the severity of the problems, whether it's economic or time-based or health, wise? Like, are there ways you can start to kind of compare the potential severity of these problems to help you make a decision? How big is the market? So once you've kind of figured out, okay, this is my customer segment, these are the people or organizations that I think I'd be serving, how many of them actually are there? How big is this market? How much competition is in the space? Is this blue ocean and you're the first person there? Or is this red ocean and you're going to be competing for a very small market share? Something to consider. Internally, ask yourself, how easy would it be for you to enter this market based on your own experience and knowledge and the knowledge of your team? And I think this is the most important one. How personally rewarding would it be for you? So in asking yourself these questions, hopefully you can filter down your customer segments again to one or two just to start with. And I want to emphasize that point. This is just for the purpose of being able to move quickly and make sense of the data. Should you find that these customer segments don't work out as customers, you can toss them aside and go back to the drawing board and bring in those other ones that you originally discarded. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. We just want to move efficiently. Now, once we figure out our customer segments, within those customer segments, there's what's called a technology adoption curve. Different psychographic groups of people or organizations. And someone in this group is going to buy from you first. And we need to find out who those people are. These psychographic groups are the following. Innovators. These are the people who lined up for the new iPhone when it first came out for like days just to get their hands on it. These are people who believe in the advancement of technology. They want to play around with it and break it and just be a part of that advancement. Then you have early adopters, and these are the ones we really want to focus on. These are people in your market, in your customer segment, that experience the problem more acutely than the rest of the market. They're willing to take on the additional risk of working with you, even though you're not established, right? Because the problem is so severe for them. So we're really on the hunt to identify who our early adopters are going to be within these customer segments. Next, we have early majority. Early majority want to see the reviews of the early adopters before they buy your product or service. They are much more risk sensitive, right? They want to ensure that you're a good product or service before they buy you. Late majority want you to be an industry standard. So they aren't even going to look at you unless you are the best at what you do. And the laggards, we usually don't worry about them because they tend to not even notice about your product or service unless it's seamlessly integrated into something else. So here, using my own company as an example, I'm going to give a weak hypothesis example and a strong hypothesis example for customer segments. A weak hypothesis would have been for me to just say governments. Why? There's multiple levels of government. There's municipal, regional, provincial, federal. There's multiple countries, right? There's multiple departments within these governments. So if I just say governments and that's dictating the direction of my tests, I'm going to get data points all over the board and it's going to be very hard for me to make sense of anything. So I want to be more specific. With some secondary market research, I could potentially come up with a better hypothesis that maybe it's someone in the transportation office or department of these governments, right? That's better. That's a better starting point. I can find those departments. I can find the contact information of those departments and reach out to them and start talking to them. You also want to come up with a hypothesis for who your early adopters are. So given some secondary market research and even talking to a couple mentors and advisors, I came up with the hypothesis that regional governments might be my early adopters. Why? Because people were telling me, what I was seeing online is smaller governments are more receptive to earlier stage technologies because they want you to come and start your companies in their regions to hire from their population and build your factories and use their resources. Made sense. It ended up being wrong, but it was a starting point to begin my testing. So let's now do value propositions. Value propositions are the products and or services that create value for a specific customer segment. What value are you actually providing your customer? And to help you figure this out, we need to go deeper into these two building blocks. We have to use what's called the value proposition canvas, which breaks up our customer segment building block and value proposition building block into their own three distinct blocks. For customer segments, it becomes a customer profile. And for a value proposition, it becomes what's called the value map. Now, I really want us to focus on the customer profile here. Again, it's all about perspective. If we can understand what our customers are trying to accomplish. So what is their job? What is that thing they are trying to do or attain? If we can understand what that is, then we can better understand what are the problems that they are facing in accomplishing that, right? What are the real problems and how severe are those problems? From the gains, what do they actually enjoy? Well, what are the things that are going well for them potentially in accomplishing that thing that we could potentially take to the next level with our product or service? Sometimes you're not solving a problem, you're doing what's called a game creator. If you develop a game on an app, you're not really potentially solving any kind of problem. It's an entertainment thing. And if you're more entertaining than other similar apps, then you might have something here, right? So it might be a game. And using that information, you can better craft your value proposition. What about your product or service is alleviating these pain points? What about your product or service is creating those gains? And it's really important when you're thinking about your value propositions, again, to be specific. How much are you improving the status quo? Or by how much are you reducing those problems? This might be a hard thing to do at the beginning with little data, but try your best, because if you have a baseline, it's easier to compare your data to see if you're on the right track. So again, using my company as an example, a weak hypothesis would be to simply say, we're going to save money on maintenance and improve road user safety. Hopefully it's glaringly obvious that there's two issues with this hypothesis. Not only is it not very specific, I just say save money. So if I save the government $1, is that enough? Do I validate my hypothesis? Probably not, right? The other glaring mistake is that it's actually two hypotheses that are lumped up together. We want to be discrete. We want to separate them because each one may be validated or rejected. So a stronger hypothesis, given some secondary market research, what I understand about the severity of my customers' problems based on secondary market research, what I understand about my product or service, again, based on secondary market research, and what it could in theory do, I say I can save maybe 16% of the asset's total life cycle costs, whether that's a road or a bridge, by implementing my product into it. Number two, second, completely different hypothesis: reduce accidents related to winter road conditions by 100%. Right now I have a benchmark to see if these are actually of value to my customers. Is 16% enough, right? Are they looking for bigger savings? What's their budget and stuff looking like, right? So a lot of this information, we need a baseline to compare to know if we're on the right track again. Channels. So there's really two channels: sales channels. So how do we actually allow our customer to purchase our product or service? And distribution channels. How do we deliver our value proposition to our customers? And when we start to think about channels, we may come to the realization That's not a direct relationship. The customer isn't directly buying our product or service from us, and we're not directly giving it to them. They're intermediaries, and these intermediaries are examples of stakeholders. So let's look at an example. This is what's called an ecosystem map, where you start to plot out all the different stakeholders involved in your business model and how they work together. So this is an example of an ecosystem map for a pharma drug manufacturing company, the manufacturer at the top of the screen here. Now, we've designed a drug that solves for a particular ailment, right? So a patient who's suffering from this illness goes to a healthcare provider. They've been paying insurance. So one of our stakeholders is an insurance company, the green box at the top right. They go to the healthcare provider, and the healthcare provider gives them our drug, and they charge the insurance company. The healthcare provider got our drug from a drug wholesaler. These are companies that amass a bunch of drugs and help with distributing them to various healthcare providers. And the drug wholesaler got the drug from us, right? So these are all at a high level, all of the stakeholders involved in selling and distributing our product, right? So you might have more, again, than just a direct relationship. You should think about this because you're going to need to talk to all of them. So an example of a weak hypothesis on this same example would just be to say we're indirectly selling to our customers and distributing our product to our customers. If you validate or reject this, this really doesn't tell you anything. We want to be more specific. So you can say, we'll indirectly sell and deliver our drug to patients through healthcare providers and wholesale drug distributors. And you could go even deeper, and you could say the Canadian Pharmaceutical Distribution Network. You could do your homework and actually find an example of a drug distributor that you could go and talk to, right? And validate whether it's actually going to be something that works in your business model or not. So again, be specific, everybody. Now, in terms of customer relationships, and this is very, very important. This might be the second most important part of the desirability section of the canvas, but these are the types of relationships a company establishes to get, keep, and grow their customer segments. And some high-level types of relationships could be one of personal assistance, right? So you have employees that help your customers buy your product or service. Dedicated personal assistance, you have an employee that's responsible for a portfolio of customers and ensuring that they hopefully get to a purchase. Self-service, your customers come to a website or something and they, look for the information themselves and you don't have any employees kind of helping them. Automated services, maybe you have a chat bot or an FAQ section that they can access. A community, so you introduce them to other people who are, either have purchased your product or in the process of purchasing the product, so they can kind of ask each other questions. I think Lululemon is a great example of this. They build a community around their brand. And co-creation, where you work to build a value proposition with your customers. So here's some high-level relationship types, but you need to go deeper. You need to come up with hypotheses for what's called the get, keep, and grow funnel. And at this stage of your development, you should only be focusing on the get side. So how do your customers become aware of similar products or services today? They find out on social media, LinkedIn. Do they follow certain magazines? They subscribe to certain magazines? Do they rely on consultants or go to conferences? How do they become aware of similar products or services today? Once they're interested, where do they go? Do they come to your website? Do they get you on a phone? They want to talk to you? What does that relationship look like? When they're actually considering buying the product, again, in a business to business model, there might be multiple due diligence meetings before you actually get to, a contract that's signed. And what does purchase look like? Do they just pay you over your online platform directly to you? Do they buy it from some third party? You sell to Walmart and Walmart sells to the customer. How does this work? So you should think through all of these things. Try and put hypotheses forward based on secondary market research. So here's an example from a company called Voyage Labs. They're from the University of Waterloo. Some of you here might be familiar with Harry. He's also a part of the IBZ team. His later stage company, they built a very robust sensor platform for sensing multiple biomarkers simultaneously for health diagnostic purposes. Now, a weak hypothesis for them would have just been to say, our customer relationship is one of personal assistance. We will just help them buy the product. Again, you can validate this pretty easily, but again, it's not going to tell you anything. This isn't executable. This isn't actionable. You want to try and be more specific because the process of securing a sale is very complex and there's multiple steps. So you might hypothesize then, okay, awareness. Our customers are going to become familiar with similar products or services and potentially ours in the future at conferences, trade shows, and possibly asking consultants. When they're interested or considering our product, they might actually draft a proposal document of how we'd work together. Maybe it's a pilot. Maybe they're going to order, 1 or 2 or 3 just for trial purposes, right? An actual proposal document will be drafted and negotiated between us and our customer. And what would purchasing look like? So maybe it's a signed contract outlining payment terms, right? This is a business to business example, but I just strongly encourage you to be specific and think through all those different aspects of the get funnel. So in summary, for the desirability section, start with customer segments. Remember, perspective is everything. Focus on your customer segments and who your early adopters are within those customer segments. Startups don't starve, they drown, right? You need to be focused. Value propositions are closely tied to customer segments. You do not want to build something that nobody wants. You do not want to fall in that 42%. And your channels may involve other stakeholders. And lastly, we need to determine the process by which our customers actually make purchasing decisions. I'll pause here again for questions. So let's jump into the feasibility section now. So the feasibility section of the canvas is comprised of 3 building blocks: key activities, key resources, and key partners. And what this is going to allow you to do is do an introspection, do an internal analysis of what is it actually going to take for my company. And this is a key point because I think a lot of people fill out the business model canvas wrong. This is not a snapshot of what you need to do right now. This is a snapshot of what you're going to have to do at scale when you're actually executing on this business model. What is it going to take for me to actually provide value to my customers? And let's talk about this in a little bit more detail here. So the first building block is key activities. These are all of the things that you will need to do to make your business model work. Ask yourself, what key activities do we need to deliver our value proposition or value propositions, plural? Now, a great way to think of key activities is by using like organizational frameworks, and there's tons out there. I'm going to use a very simple one. So a lot of times, especially in larger tech kind of companies, you have a tech team or multiple tech teams that are working on the novel innovation that allows you to have that value proposition in the first place, that competitive advantage. They work with a product team that integrates all of these components together into the single product that ends up being, they have to deal with manufacturing, they have to deal with distribution. The product team also works very closely with a sales and marketing team. These are people who are responsible for helping your customers through that get funnel, getting that purchase, whether that's customer relationship or, that portfolio example, having people who are responsible for getting you sales. And they'll be relaying feedback back to the product team if they're not happy with the product or service. You might have a regulatory team, depending on your industry. Like mine, there might be regulations and standards and things that you have to abide by for you to even sell your product, right? So you might have an actual team that's responsible for working with these other stakeholders, coordinating with the product team to ensure that your product or service hits the right requirements. You'll have an operations team. These are the C-suite level executives, CEO, COO, CFO, CMO, all of the O's. And I know a lot of acronyms, you don't need to know what they are, but all of the people responsible for the day in and day out operations of your company. And the efficiency, the how well you're able to do all of these activities will allow you to raise funding. Now, this is a kind of Microsoft style operational framework where you have different teams siloed and doing different things. You could have a Google model where you have people from different departments working together on projects and stuff. There's no right or wrong way for this, but I want you to start thinking through again, what are all those activities that you will need to perform to deliver your value proposition. Now, another thing that I hope you're starting to see here is that as a startup, as a founder, you're going to have to do all of these things. You're going to be the one potentially building out the tech. Maybe you come from an engineering or science background. Maybe you've kind of stumbled across something in your lab already or in class, or you can code and you're building it out already. You'll be putting the product together potentially. You'll be working on sales and marketing. You'll be dealing with regulatory agencies. And as the team grows, you'll be an operations person, right? But the beautiful thing about being an entrepreneur, a founder, and what you're going to get that no one else gets, there's no founder school, comes from experiences. You're going to have to do each of these jobs. You're going to have to wear multiple hats. And you're going to become an expert in every single one, so that when you're ready to hire the next person, you can elevate the talent pool of your entire organization. So it's awesome being a founder. It's a lot of work, but you become an extremely, extremely skilled, knowledgeable individual. So let's look at some hypotheses here for your key activities. Let's look at Tesla. Everyone knows Tesla. They were doing incredible in terms of stocks. I just started investing in stocks and they're falling. Elon Musk has got to stop tweeting. It's giving me heart attacks every time he does. But they're an awesome company and they have a tech team. They have multiple R&D teams working on the battery pack, the chassis of the car, the body of the car, each of these components. They have a product team that puts it all together. They have sales and marketing who will pump out ads and help people through that get funnel. They do personal assistance. They have stores and malls and stuff helping people pick out what cars they want and how they want it designed. They have a regulatory team that's responsible for ensuring the cars meet federal safety requirements, that they abide by these regulations, right? Let's talk about key resources now. So these are the most important assets that make the business model work. What resources do we need to deliver our value proposition? So we just thought through key activities. What are the resources that we're going to need to do those key activities? So there's 4 different types of resources, and we're going to talk about them with this example. This is a company from the Netherlands called Dyco, and they dye textiles using CO2. Really, really cool technology, way better for the environment. And big companies like Nike, Adidas, Puma, they're all using them now, which is really, really cool. So they have intellectual resources. You can search up their patents. They have utility patents around how they dye textiles using CO2. They have human resources, right? All those activities need people to do them. So they have engineers, researchers, textile experts, equipment technicians, and operators. They require physical lab space, manufacturing, and storage facilities. And they have financial resources, existing funds, lines of credits, things of that nature. But these are the main buckets you need to think through. Now, in thinking about key activities and key resources, something that might become very apparent is it's not going to be super efficient for you to do everything yourself. You're in an extremely competitive environment. You're trying to, move faster than everybody else. So it's not efficient for you to do everything, right? There's a lot of things that go into running a company at scale. And in those instances, we might need key partners. Key partners are the networks of suppliers and partners that make the business model work. So as I was alluding to, ask yourself, which key activities and our key resources do we need help with? Now, another key thing that separates a key partner just from a stakeholder is if they share in the risk of your business. So that's a key thing to think about. They're not just If you're selling your product to your customer through Amazon and it's just a standard customer relationship, that's not a key partner. They're just a distribution stakeholder, right? If you set up a unique agreement with a distributor where now you both have a little bit of risk in the game and there's an exchange of value that goes beyond monetary, then it's a key partner. So some key considerations to think about when you are creating a partnership. I think it's one key element is best represented in this quote. A successful partnership is built around a core value exchange. Each company on both sides of the equation need to be deriving value. So some best practices to think about here are we really need to apply the same methodology we're applying to our market, our customers, to who we think our key partners are. We need to understand that value exchange. And if we understand what value we're providing them or how big of a need they have for our business, then we can understand the urgency driving the other side. And it gives us stronger legs to stand on at the negotiation table. Another thing to think about, and these again, high level words of wisdom here, don't put all your eggs in one basket. You don't want to limit yourself to, just one option. You want to make sure you have the best deal possible. So you want to kind of keep your options open. Another thing is you don't want to go down with a sinking ship. You don't want all your entire business hinging on just one player. If something happens to them, you fall down with them, right? So key thing to think about, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Keep your options open. Now there's multiple categories of partners, and myself and my colleague Harry came up with kind of a framework that you can apply to categorize them. Now this isn't a must when you're filling out your business model canvas, but just to think about how important they are to your business model. You'll have unfair advantage partners. So these are partners that give you special resources that your competitors can't get. You have mission critical partners. So they're widely available, but their resources are crucial to you being able to execute on your business model. And common partners, again, widely available, but no set partner is going to make or break your business. So an example of this is Medela Health. This was Harry's first company, and they are developing a smart contact lens to monitor glucose levels. And their unfair advantage partner was a contact lens research center in Waterloo. There's two in the world, one in Waterloo and one in Australia. And setting up a partnership with them saved them millions of dollars and gave them an unfair advantage in the space. Their mission critical partner was a microchip foundry that helped them build their product. These foundries were readily available, but having access to them and their resources helped them build their product and deliver their value proposition. For common partners, as part of their customer relationship and helping people through that get funnel, they used sales consultants. Now, no set sale consultant would make or break their entire business model. There's lots of them, but they're really important for them to secure sales. So in summary, for feasibility section, it's an introspection of your organization. Take stock. What do you need to have and what do you need to do to deliver your value proposition, and what might we actually need help with? And then key partnerships, like with customer segments, are predicated on perspective. Understand the value you are providing to them. So the viability section, we got two building blocks left: revenue streams and cost structure. And these two building blocks represent the economics behind your business model. So I was kind of alluding to them and answering a couple of the questions here. Now, when it comes to revenue streams, it's the cash a company generates from each customer segment. So you have to think, for what value is each customer segment truly willing to pay? And there's two types of revenue streams. There's transactional, where someone pays you for something and you give them your value proposition, it's done. Or there's continuous, a subscription-based model where they're continuously paying you for access to your value proposition. So I think it's called recurring. So when you start thinking about these revenue streams, it's really important to also start thinking about how you're going to price your product or service. And there's different mechanisms for doing that. Number one, it's called a fixed pricing strategy, where you price your product based on static variables, things that don't change. So you can use what's called a cost plus model, where you take all the associated costs that you think it's going to take to build your product and manufacture it and distribute it, and you add a industry standard markup percentage. You can find this information online. Somewhere back in the day, I found a report with like every industry and the kind of average markup percentages that are added to products, right? It's just a standard you can throw on there. Another one is a market-oriented pricing model. So based on everything you know about how much your product is gonna cost to manufacture and distribute, all the taxes associated and everything, and your understanding of the quality of your competitors' offerings, you choose to price your product differently based on the competition. So you can choose to price the product the same as your competition. If you believe your value proposition is stronger, you can price it below the competition as an added incentive, like our product's cheaper than our competitors. Maybe that will drive more sales. Or you can price it above your competition to give it that added perspective of a higher quality. Now, there's pros and cons to these strategies. The pro is that it's a fixed pricing strategy. So every sale that you get, it's going to be the same profit margin, same amount of revenues. It's reliable. You can kind of plan out things a little bit more accurately. But the negative, the con to this, is that it's also fixed, right? If you'd priced your product lower, maybe you'd make more sales, less profit, but more sales. If you priced it higher, maybe make less sales, but more profit. So an alternative mechanism is something called the dynamic pricing strategy, where you deliver the same value proposition at multiple price points, or you change the price based on fluctuating market conditions. So I'll give two examples here. Tesla, for example, came out with a luxury version of their car, very expensive, right? Made not that many sales, but the sales that they were making, they're bringing in a lot of profit. And over time, they've released cheaper and cheaper and cheaper models of their vehicles, right? Taking up more and more and more of the market. Same value proposition for their cars, different models, of course, but they're taking up more of the market. There's more sales opportunities to be had. On the flip side here, restaurants are starting to employ a dynamic pricing strategy where the fluctuation of how much their dishes cost will vary depending on how high or low the cost of the ingredients that make those dishes go up and down. So a lot of some higher end restaurants in the world actually have digitalized menus and stuff that will actually change based on fluctuating market conditions. Now, both of these mechanisms follow this kind of path here. Starts with the product, right? Your understanding of what your product is and everything that's going to go into making it. There's an associated cost with all of that, right? You determine your sales price based on, whether it's a static or dynamic pricing strategy. There's a perceived value by your customer, and the customer will either buy or they won't. Now, if you really look at this, it's a very inefficient process because you're laboring under the assumption that what you're pricing your product at aligns with the perceived value of your customer, right? You're laboring under the assumption that your your competitors have done their due diligence and they're pricing their products properly, and they're not leaving additional value on the table. So what I want all of you to do in your primary market research, and again, we'll be talking about it in 2 weeks' time, is flipping this process on its head and doing what's called a value-based pricing model, where you actually start with your customer. And by understanding their problems, how severe those problems are, maybe even what budgets they have for these problems, you can determine how much value you can actually provide to them. And with that understanding, determine your sales price and work backwards. Can we manufacture something now that is going to meet those problems, alleviate those problems, and build that final product? And what you'll find more often than not, is you're actually able to charge a lot more than what your competitors are charging. You're really assessing the value you can bring to your competition. And this is also really valuable when you're doing novel things that there really isn't a lot of competition to base anything off of. So I encourage you to apply a value-based pricing model where you're trying to figure out how much this would be worth to your customers through primary market research. So a weak hypothesis here would just be to say a transactional revenue stream. They pay me once and that's it, and I get my product. A stronger hypothesis, even though, again, I'm just starting out, I can do some preliminary research and find out how much it costs per meter squared to put in a heating system and how much per meter squared it costs to lay new asphalt on a road. And I can come up with a baseline to say, okay, maybe we would charge our product approximately $200 per meter squared. Is that going to resonate with our customers or not? I don't know, but it gives me a great benchmark to compare my findings to when I'm talking to my customers and I find out how big of a problem this is, how much money they're spending on it over time, what their budget is, and hopefully this $200 per meter squared makes sense. Maybe in a best case scenario, I can charge more. They have a lot more budget and I can charge a lot more and make a lot more profit. Or maybe I'm way off the mark and I have to figure out a way to manufacture my product a lot cheaper. Now, in terms of cost structure, these are all the costs incurred to operate your business model. What's the most important cost inherent to the business model? And I want us to think back to all of the activities and all of the resources that you're putting in to make your business model work. What are the costs associated with these? And hopefully, again, at scale, when you're actually executing on this business model, your profits outweigh the costs that you're putting in to the business. Now, in the beginning, you're going to do things that aren't scalable. You're going to be in the red a lot, investing in those resources and people. And that's why you have to usually raise capital, millions of dollars, to actually start all of this. And so you really want to make sure that you're building towards something that's going to work. And the better you can show that this business model is going to work, I've done the research, it is going to work, the higher likelihood you'll be able to raise capital. So in summary, the pricing mechanism we use for our product or service has a profound effect on sales. Perspective is everything. We need to apply the same methodology to pricing our product or service. And the viability section of the canvas helps us convert our business model into financials. Any last questions?